to Deep Sleep Stories. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. If these stories help you relax or fall asleep, a short review, comment, or sharing the podcast with someone who might benefit is a simple and meaningful way to support the show so that we may continue to offer it for free. Now, take a slow, gentle breath and let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories. Tonight, you'll drift into a calm tale about a seaside lighthouse and a blue umbrella that seems to belong to the wind itself. Settle in the way that feels most comfortable. Let your shoulders loosen as if warm hands have lifted a gentle weight from them. Let your jaw soften, your tongue resting easily, your brow smoothing, as though it's been kissed by a quiet tide. If it helps, imagine the room around you dimming, not into darkness, but into a softer kind of light, like twilight behind closed curtains. Take a slow breath in, as if you're sipping cool air through a straw. Hold it for a moment, only as long as feels pleasant. Then breathe out, long and unhurried, like a candle's flame bowing without going out. Again, breathe in, calm and steady. Breathe out, letting the day slide away. Now picture the sound of distant waves, not loud, not demanding, just a steady hush that keeps its promises. The air tastes faintly of salt and clean rain. Somewhere far off, a lantern turns in a slow circle, and the world feels safe enough to rest. With every breath, you can let go a little more. With every exhale, your thoughts can loosen their grip, floating away like small boats, untied from a dock. And as you relax, the story begins. On a quiet coastline where the cliffs leaned toward the sea, as if listening, there stood a lighthouse built from pale stone that caught the moonlight kindly. It wasn't the tallest lighthouse, nor the newest, nor the brightest in any loud way, but it had an unshakable presence, the way a peaceful person can fill a room without speaking. A narrow path wound up the cliffside to reach it, edged by grasses that whispered whenever the wind passed through. The wind here was never cruel. It simply traveled, always arriving from somewhere unknown, always leaving for some far-off place. It carried scents of kelp and wildflowers, hints of driftwood warmed by sun, and the faint mineral smell of stone that had endured many seasons. At the very top of the cliff, near the lighthouse door, there was a wooden bench smoothed by weather and time, and beside that bench, leaning in a corner, as if it belonged there, was a blue umbrella. It was a remarkable shade of blue, deep as evening water, bright as a clear sky after rain. Its fabric had a satin sheen that caught light softly, and the handle was polished wood, warm to the touch. Anyone passing might think it had been forgotten, yet it never blew away, even when strong gusts tugged at coats and bent the grasses low. It stayed patiently, as if waiting for the right hands. The lighthouse keeper was a gentle soul named Rowan. They lived alone inside the lighthouse, though alone was not quite accurate, because the sea was always present and the wind was always visiting, and the seabirds were constant companions gliding past the lantern room with curious eyes. Rowan had a way of moving through the day, as if time were a soft, blanket rather than a sharp schedule. They rose when the light became friendly, brewed tea that smelled of herbs and honey, and swept the stone floors with a straw broom that made a soothing hush-hush sound against the ground. There were rituals, small and comforting. The brass rails of the spiral staircase were polished until they shone like sunset. The lantern glass was cleaned carefully, each pane wiped with slow attention. In the evenings, as the sky slipped into darker shades, Rowan lit the lamp and watched the beam reach outward, sweeping over the water like a calm, patient hand. Sometimes ships passed in the distance, tiny and quiet from this height. Sometimes the sea was empty except for moonlight and the sigh of waves. Either way, Rowan's lighthouse light turned steadily, faithful as a heartbeat. And still, the blue umbrella remained near the bench. Rowan didn't remember bringing it there. That was the curious thing. They simply noticed it one morning, as though it had always been part of the scene. The umbrella looked dry even after rain. It looked unbothered even after storms. It looked as if it belonged to the lighthouse, like the door, like the stone walls, like the lantern itself. Rowan, who appreciated mysteries that felt gentle rather than troubling, decided not to force an answer. They were the kind of person who believed some things arrived when they were needed, and that the world had its own quiet ways of arranging kindness. On certain days, the coastline would fill with mist, rolling in like a slow exhale from the ocean. The cliffs would blur at the edges, the horizon would soften, and the lighthouse would seem to float between sea and sky. On those mist days, Rowan noticed that the blue umbrella looked even brighter, as if it held a small piece of clear weather within it. The first time Rowan touched it, they did so without hurry. Their hand closed around the wooden handle. The umbrella felt warm, strangely warm, like sunlit driftwood. Rowan lifted it, testing its weight. It was lighter than expected, as though it were made not only of fabric and ribs, but also of airy intention. They didn't open it, not yet. Stood there quietly while Rowan went about. Stood there quietly while Rowan went about the day, making soup with sea salt and thyme, folding linens, setting a small vase with cliffside flowers on the kitchen table. But when Rowan looked again later, the umbrella was gone. Not stolen, not misplaced. It was simply back outside, leaning near the bench as though it had never moved. Rowan stood in the doorway and watched it for a long moment. The air was still. The grasses barely stirred. No footprints marked the path. The blue umbrella rested with perfect calm. Rowan felt a soft smile form, the kind that comes when you recognize the world is doing something odd, yet oddly kind. "All right," Rowan murmured, not in challenge, but in acceptance. "You prefer the sea air." From that day, Rowan stopped bringing the umbrella inside. They would nod at it in the morning, sometimes brushing the canopy with their fingertips as they passed. It became part of their greeting to the day, like the first sip of tea, like the first glance at the ocean. And in time, the umbrella became something else as well. A sign. There was a small village down the coast, tucked in a curve of land where the shore made a sheltered bay. The village had narrow lanes, stone cottages with smoky chimneys, and windows that glowed warmly at dusk. People there were used to the lighthouse and the lighthouse keeper. They waved to Rowan on supply days, left baskets of bread and jars of jam at the foot of the cliff, and listened for the foghorn when mist pressed close. The villagers had their own quiet stories, as all villages do. Some stories were practical, which fish were running when the tides would be low enough to gather sea glass. Some were old and dreamy, tales of singing stones and moonlit seals that watched from the surf with knowing eyes. And some stories, spoken only in soft voices, were about the blue umbrella. They said it appeared for those who needed shelter, not from rain, but from something less obvious, from worry, from loneliness, from the sharpness of too many thoughts. They said if you climbed the path to the lighthouse when your mind felt heavy, and if you found the umbrella open, resting beside the bench like an invitation, then you could sit beneath it and feel your thoughts become quieter. You could feel the world hold you without asking anything in return. Rowan heard these stories in bits and pieces. A baker mentioned it while handing over a loaf, still warm. A fisher spoke of it while mending nets near the harbor. An old woman with sea silver hair smiled and said, "It's a kind umbrella. It knows." But Rowan never corrected them because there was nothing to correct. The umbrella was there. It did seem to choose its moments. And on days when the world felt a little too sharp, Rowan sometimes noticed the umbrella's canopy had been opened, its blue curve like a small sky near the bench. On such days, Rowan would sit beneath it, not because they were certain of anything, but because it felt right. The shade beneath the umbrella was cool and quiet. Sound changed there. The wind softened, the distant gull calls became rounder, and the constant hush of waves seemed to settle into a slower rhythm. Rowan would breathe, and the breath would feel easier. They would watch the sea, and the sea would look like a long, slow thought that never needed to end. The lighthouse had a library, small but beloved. Shelves curved along a wall, packed with weathered spines and folded maps, journals of past keepers, and a few books so old they smelled like dried herbs. In those journals, Rowan sometimes read about odd little wonders. Lights seen dancing on the water, a bell that rang without being touched, a cat that appeared in winter and vanished in spring. Rowan did not find mention of a blue umbrella. Still, Rowan began keeping their own journal, a habit already common among keepers. Their handwriting was soft and slanted. Their entries weren't dramatic. They were made of small observations. Mist this morning, then sun. The umbrella was open at dusk. A ship passed close enough to see its lanterns. The wind smelled of rain but didn't bring it. Days drifted by like clouds. Then one evening, the sea brought something new. It began as a shimmer far out on the water, a flicker that didn't match moonlight or starlight. Rowan noticed it while adjusting the lantern's wick, At first, it seemed like phosphorescence, the sea's occasional habit of glowing where waves broke. But this light was steadier. It bobbed and blinked like a small, slow heartbeat. Rowan leaned closer to the glass and watched. The shimmer moved, not quickly, not urgently, but with purpose. It drew nearer, becoming a tiny boat, the kind used for short trips along the coast. No sail was raised. Oars dipped in and out of the dark water with a quiet, steady rhythm. Rowan's attention sharpened, though their body remained calm. They had seen boats in the night before, of course. But there was something about the way this one came, like a thought arriving in the mind at just the right moment. As the boat reached the base of the cliff, it slipped into a narrow cove where the rocks made a small shelter. Rowan could barely make out the figure inside, but they saw enough. Someone wrapped in a cloak, moving with careful slowness. The figure secured the boat and began the climb. Rowan lit a lamp and went to the door, stepping out into the cool night. The air tasted damp, and a fine mist clung to the stone. The lighthouse beam passed overhead, sweeping across the sea like a calm eyelid opening and closing. The figure approached, footsteps soft on the path. When they reached the top, they paused near the bench, near the blue umbrella. Rowan didn't speak at first. Sometimes silence was the best greeting. The visitor drew back their hood. They were young in the way of someone who had not yet learned to hide tiredness. Their eyes were wide and reflective, like dark pools. They offered a hesitant smile. "I'm sorry," the visitor said quietly. "I didn't know where else to go." Rowan's voice came out warm and steady. "You're welcome here." The visitor's shoulders lowered just a little, as if those words loosened something knotted inside them. They glanced at the umbrella, which was closed, leaning beside the bench. "I saw it from the water," the visitor whispered, as if afraid to disturb the night. "That blue. It looked like a piece of sky." Rowan followed the visitor's gaze. "It does." The visitor's name was Leora. They had come from a neighboring stretch of coast, from a place where the sea met a marshland, and the air was always filled with the sound of reeds. Leora spoke in small pieces, like someone laying down fragile objects one by one. There had been dreams, they said. Strange dreams that pulled them toward the lighthouse. Dreams of a turning light, of a door opening on its own, of an umbrella spreading wide over an endless quiet ocean. "I thought I was being foolish," Leora admitted, but the dream felt gentle, like it was guiding me, not pushing me. Rowan nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Then it brought you somewhere safe." Rowan invited Leora inside. The lighthouse smelled of tea and polished brass, of stone warmed by lamplight. Rowan set another kettle on the stove. They offered Leora a chair near the small hearth, where embers glowed like sleepy stars. Leora cradled the mug when it was handed to them, letting steam warm their face. Their hands trembled slightly. Not from cold, Rowan sensed, but from the aftermath of holding too much tension for too long. Rowan didn't press for details. They simply created space. A blanket was offered, a bowl of soup, a quiet corner where the wind could not reach. As Leora ate, their breathing gradually slowed. Their eyes softened. Outside, the sea continued its hush. The lighthouse beam continued its steady sweep. The world kept moving, yet nothing demanded hurry. Later, when Leora seemed calmer, Rowan asked gently, "Would you like to sit outside for a moment? The air is kind tonight." Leora hesitated, then nodded. They stepped out together, carrying the warmth of the lighthouse with them. The mist had thickened slightly, turning the lantern beam into a pale ribbon that seemed almost touchable. The bench waited. The umbrella waited. And then, without either of them moving toward it, the umbrella opened. It was a slow, graceful unfurling, like a flower blooming in moonlight. The ribs extended without a sound. The blue canopy spread wide, catching a faint shimmer of light that didn't seem to come from the lamp or the moon. It simply glowed softly, as if remembering daylight. Leora gasped, not in fear but in awe. Rowan watched with a calm wonder they did not try to explain. They had suspected the umbrella had a will of its own. Now, seeing it open like an invitation, they felt a quiet certainty settle in their chest. They sat beneath it together. Under the umbrella, the mist seemed to pause at the edges, as if respecting a boundary. The wind became a distant murmur. The sea's hush deepened, becoming something like a lullaby. Leora's shoulders uncurled. Their hands, which had been clasped tightly, loosened in their lap. Their gaze drifted outward toward the dark water, where faint lights trembled. "It feels quieter here," Leora murmured. Rowan's voice was gentle. "Yes." They sat without speaking for a long while. The lighthouse beam swept over the sea, passing across distant waves, then returning. Each rotation felt like a slow, soothing breath. Leora's eyes grew heavy. Rowan didn't mind. They understood that the umbrella was doing what it did best, making room for rest. When Leora finally spoke again, their words were slow and soft. "I think I've been carrying something for too long." Rowan didn't ask what. They only said, "You don't have to carry it here." Leora's eyes shone with tears that did not fall. They simply rested there, like dew on a leaf, reflecting the faint light. Under the blue canopy, something subtle changed in the air. It felt as if the world itself was listening, not to take, not to judge, but to witness quietly. And then, very gently, there came a sound from the sea. Not a splash, not a cry. A bell tone, distant and clear, as if a small chime had been rung beneath the water. Leora startled slightly, then relaxed again. Rowan tilted their head, listening. The sound came again, and this time it carried a faint melody. 3 notes, spaced wide apart, like stepping stones across a stream. Rowan's heart warmed with recognition, though they didn't know why. The lighthouse journals had mentioned bells, without hands, singing stones, odd little wonders. The melody drifted closer, The water below the cliff began to shimmer, not with harsh light, but with a soft glow like moonlight caught in a net. From the surface rose tiny points of brightness, small as fireflies, yet steadier, calmer. They hovered just above the waves, bobbing gently as if carried by invisible currents. Leora leaned forward, enchanted. What are they? Rowan's voice was almost a whisper. I don't know, but they seem friendly. The lights drifted toward the cliff, rising higher as if climbing the air. They moved slowly, circling the lighthouse in a wide spiral. Some paused near the lantern beam as though curious about it. Others gathered near the umbrella, drawn to the blue canopy's quiet glow. As they floated closer, Rowan could see that each light held a tiny shape within it, like a seed inside a translucent shell. The shapes were indistinct, sometimes like a feather, sometimes like a shell, sometimes like a small curled leaf. Each one different, each one gentle. Leora breathed out a slow sigh, and in that breath was a kind of relief. Rowan watched as the lights drifted under the umbrella's edge. They did not touch the fabric. They simply hovered there, as if resting in its calm. The bell tone sounded again, closer now, and the melody changed. Still simple, still slow, but warmer. Like a lullaby remembered from childhood, not in exact notes, but in feeling. Leora's eyes slipped shut. Rowan stayed still, sensing that this was not a moment to be interrupted with questions. It was a moment to be felt, then allowed to pass in its own way. Minutes, or perhaps something softer than minutes, went by. The lights continued their slow dance. The lighthouse beam continued its patient sweep. Under the umbrella, the world felt held. At last, the lights began to drift back toward the sea as if satisfied. They descended in a gradual spiral, their glow fading only slightly, like embers carried away on a breeze. The melody grew fainter, the bell tone more distant, until it became part of the ocean's hush again. Leora opened their eyes. They looked different. Not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention, but as if their face had been gently smoothed by sleep. I feel... Leora searched for the word, then smiled softly. Lighter. Rowan nodded. Then the journey was worth it. They helped Leora stand and guided them back inside. The lighthouse felt warmer now, more intimate against the mist. Rowan prepared a small room with a clean bed and a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. Leora paused at the doorway, looking at Rowan with quiet gratitude. Thank you, they said, voice thick with tiredness. Rowan's answer was simple. Rest. Leora slept. In the night, Rowan climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room and tended the light. Their movements were slow and careful. They felt the lingering calm of the umbrella's shelter, the memory of glowing sea lights like drifting dreams. As the lighthouse beam swept the water, Rowan thought about how the world offered comfort in unexpected forms. A turning light, a warm mug, a blue umbrella that opened on its own. Rowan wondered softly if the umbrella had come, because it sensed the needs of those who climbed the cliff, needs that could not always be spoken. Over the next days, Leora stayed at the lighthouse. They did not rush to leave. Rowan did not rush them. The lighthouse had a way of loosening urgency. The sea insisted on its own rhythm. The wind reminded everything to soften. And the turning light taught patience with every slow rotation. In the mornings, Rowan and Leora shared tea near the window. Sometimes they spoke, and sometimes they didn't. Silence between them grew comfortable, like a well-worn sweater. Leora helped with small tasks, folding linens, tending a little herb pot on the windowsill, sweeping the steps with the straw broom. They moved as though learning a new way to exist, one that allowed gentleness. In the afternoons, they walked the cliff path. The grasses brushed their ankles. The sky shifted through pale colors. The ocean stretched outward like a calm mind. And always the umbrella remained near the bench. Sometimes it stayed closed. Sometimes it opened as if to offer shade even when the sun was mild. Sometimes it opened when mist rolled in, creating a pocket of clear quiet beneath it. It seemed to choose moments when the air felt unsettled, or when Leora's eyes grew distant and thoughtful. When that happened, Rowan would simply gesture toward it, and they would sit together beneath the blue canopy until whatever heaviness had gathered began to dissolve. One evening, Leora spoke more than they had before. The sky was dusky, the sea a dark mirror. The lighthouse beam had not yet been lit. The world was in the soft pause between day and night. "I used to love the sound of the marsh," Leora said, voice low. "The reeds, the frogs, the wind moving through water plants. But lately, it started to feel like noise, like everything was asking something from me." Rowan listened without interrupting. Leora continued, words slow, as if they were being carefully unwrapped. "People needed me. I tried to be what they wanted, helpful, steady, always available. And it's not that I didn't care. I did, I do, but I began to feel hollow, like I was giving away pieces of myself and forgetting to keep any." Rowan's gaze remained gentle. "That happens." Leora swallowed, then nodded. "Then I started dreaming of this place, of the lighthouse, of the umbrella. I didn't know why. I only knew I needed to come." Rowan reached out and rested a hand lightly on the bench between them, not touching Leora, only offering closeness without pressure. Sometimes the world calls you back to yourself. Leora let out a shaky breath. Under the blue canopy, the wind softened further, as if the umbrella approved. Rowan said, "You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to be quiet. You're allowed to keep parts of yourself safe." Leora's eyes filled again, and this time a tear slid down their cheek. They didn't wipe it away. They simply let it be. The sea below sighed. A gull called faintly in the distance. The lighthouse stood steady behind them, its stone holding warmth from the day. After that evening, Leora seemed to change in small ways. They laughed more easily. They stared at the horizon with less tension in their brow. They moved as though they had discovered an inner room they could return to whenever they needed. One morning the weather shifted. The sky turned a soft gray, and a gentle rain began to fall, fine as a veil. It did not pour, it simply drifted down cool and quiet. Rowan stepped outside and found the umbrella open, as if it had been waiting for this rain. Leora joined them at the doorway, wrapped in a shawl. "Will it keep us dry?" Leora asked, smiling. Rowan's eyes twinkled softly. Only one way to find out. They walked beneath the umbrella down the path a little way, not far, just enough to feel the rain's presence without being drenched. Under the blue canopy, the sound of raindrops became a soft tapping, like fingertips on a drum, steady and soothing. Yet the strange thing was this: the rain did not seem to land on them at all. It landed on the umbrella, yes, beading and sliding off in shimmering trails. But beneath it the air was dry, warm, and faintly scented, like clean linen dried in sun. Leora lifted a hand, palm up, testing the space under the umbrella's edge. Just beyond the canopy, rain touched their skin coolly. Under it, warmth returned. "It's like," Leora began. "Like it makes its own weather," Rowan finished softly. They walked slowly, letting the rhythm of rain wash over them. The sea looked darker, more velvet. The cliffside grasses shone with tiny droplets. The world felt freshly rinsed. When they returned, Rowan noticed something small near the bench. A smooth stone, oval and pale, with a faint blue line running through it like a vein of sky. Rowan picked it up. It was warm like the umbrella handle. On its surface, etched so lightly it might have been a trick of light, was a tiny symbol, something like a spiral, something like a wave. Leora leaned closer. "Where did that come from?" Rowan turned toward the sea, thoughtful. Perhaps it was left as a gift. They placed the stone on the windowsill inside, where it caught the day's soft gray light. Over time, other small objects appeared near the bench. A feather that shimmered faintly, a shell the color of dawn, a piece of sea glass shaped like a teardrop and tinted the same deep blue as the umbrella canopy. Rowan and Leora collected them and arranged them on a small shelf. The lighthouse began to hold a quiet little museum of gentle wonders. And with each new object, the feeling grew stronger that the lighthouse was part of something larger than itself. Not in a grand, demanding way, in a subtle way, like a thread connecting calm places across the world. On a night when the sky cleared and stars scattered like salt, Rowan and Leora sat beneath the umbrella again. The canopy was open, though there was no rain. It offered not shelter, but closeness. The stars above were sharp points of light, and the sea below reflected them in broken pieces. The lighthouse beam swept, slow and steady, as if it were painting circles in the air. Leora spoke softly, almost drowsy. "Do you think the umbrella belongs to someone?" Rowan considered. "It might belong to the lighthouse, or to the wind, or to anyone who needs it." Leora's eyelids drooped. "It feels like it belongs to rest." Rowan smiled. "That sounds right." As the night deepened, the air grew colder, but under the umbrella the warmth remained. The world seemed to breathe more slowly. Leora leaned back, letting their head rest against the stone wall of the lighthouse. Rowan sat beside them, quiet and steady. The sea lights did not appear that night. The bell tone did not ring. Nothing magical happened in a way that demanded attention. And yet the calm itself felt magical, as if the simplest thing in the world, sitting quietly under a blue umbrella, was a kind of enchantment. Eventually Leora spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "I think I'm ready to go home soon." Rowan nodded. "The lighthouse will still be here." "And the umbrella?" Leora asked, half teasing, half sincere. Rowan's gaze drifted to the blue canopy above them. "I suspect it will be wherever it needs to be." Leora smiled, and the smile looked peaceful rather than uncertain. When the time came for Leora to leave, it was on a morning washed clean by wind. The sky was pale blue and the sea looked calm and glassy. Rowan helped carry supplies down to the small boat. Bread, a jar of honey, a bundle of dried herbs. Leora stood at the base of the cliff and looked up at the lighthouse. From there, it seemed even more like a guardian. Watchful, quiet, kind. Then Leora's gaze caught the umbrella near the bench, still open, its blue canopy bright against the pale stone. Leora climbed halfway back, up the path, as if drawn. Rowan watched, curious and calm. Leora stopped beneath the umbrella and reached out, touching the handle gently. "Thank you," they whispered, not to Rowan, but to the umbrella itself, to the place, to the quiet that had held them. The umbrella shivered faintly, as though responding to a breeze that hadn't arrived. Leora let their hand fall, turned, and descended again. They joined Rowan at the boat, their face softer than when they had come. Rowan stood on the shore and watched as Leora rowed away, oars dipping into the water with steady rhythm. The boat became a small shape, then a smaller one, then a shimmer. Rowan climbed back to the lighthouse alone, but not lonely. They felt the lingering presence of shared calm, like warmth left on a chair after someone stands. At the top, the umbrella had closed again, resting beside the bench, as composed as ever. Rowan resumed their days. Tea, sweeping, polishing brass, tending the lantern light. The sea continued its hush. The wind continued its wandering. The lighthouse beam continued its slow, faithful sweep. And occasionally, visitors came. Not many. Just enough. A traveler with tired eyes and a heavy bag. A young couple speaking softly as if afraid their worries might be overheard. A sailor who sat beneath the umbrella and wept quietly, then stood and left with a calmer gaze. A village child who climbed up just to look at the sea, giggling when the umbrella opened as if bowing in greeting. Rowan welcomed them all in the same gentle way, offering warmth without questions, giving rest without demands. Until evening, spreading wide when the sky was full of stars, until evening, spreading wide when the sky turned rose and gray. Some nights it opened under stars, creating a small pocket of sky beneath the larger sky. Rowan began to notice a pattern, though it was not the kind you could chart or predict. The umbrella opened when someone needed to feel held. It opened when a thought stormed too loudly inside a mind. It opened when the world felt too big and a person needed something smaller and kinder. Rowan never tried to control it. They simply trusted it, the way you trust the sea to be the sea. One late afternoon, when the sun was low and the shadows of clouds moved slowly across the water, Rowan found a small envelope tucked beneath the umbrella handle. The paper was thick and cream-colored, the edges slightly frayed as if it had traveled far. Rowan brought it inside and opened it carefully. Inside was a simple note written in ink that looked faintly blue. May this shelter remind you that you are allowed to rest. There was no signature. Rowan sat at the kitchen table for a long time, holding the note in the warmth of their hands. They did not feel the need to know who had written it. The message itself was enough. Outside, the lighthouse stood steady. The umbrella leaned beside the bench. The sea breathed in and out below. And somewhere, perhaps, the quiet thread connecting calm places tightened gently, like a knot tied with care. As the story settles, everything in the lighthouse slows. The lantern turns, the sea hushes. The wind becomes a soft, distant whisper. Rowan moves through the quiet rooms with unhurried steps. A mug is rinsed, a blanket is folded. The lamp is lowered until the light is just a gentle glow. Outside, the blue umbrella rests near the bench, calm and patient. It doesn't need to move. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply waits, ready to open whenever comfort is needed. The lighthouse beam sweeps once more across the water, and the waves answer with a steady, soothing rhythm. The world feels wide, but not overwhelming. It feels spacious and safe. Breath becomes slower. Thoughts become softer. Like mist, they drift and thin. In the quiet, Rowan sits for a moment, listening to the sea. Their eyelids grow heavy. Their shoulders sink. They let the lighthouse do its work. Let the umbrella keep its gentle watch. Let the night hold everything without effort. And you can do the same. Let your body rest. Let your mind unclench. Let the sound of waves, real or imagined, carry you gently downward. The lighthouse remains. The blue umbrella remains. Calm remains. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.